Hello everyone, my name is Hannah Silman, and I will be presenting my research on the impacts of climate change on water usage in the Pacific Northwest. My research is on the Pacific Northwest region, which has pretty extreme seasons, and as global climate change is becoming accelerated, the patterns for precipitation are also becoming even more extreme. Precipitation is very important to the region as water is important to everywhere, but within the region there are many mountain ranges and the snowpack in the mountains leads to the spring snow melt, and as precipitation trends are changing, there is becoming less snowpack, which leads to less spring snow melt and changes stream flow. So the access to water as water storage changes is becoming impactful to humans, and the availability for drinking water, agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and hydropower because of these changes. The Pacific Northwest region usually includes Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, but it also sometimes includes Montana and Northern California. However, I generally focused on Washington, Oregon, and Idaho for mine. Water is important for all regions, but specifically for the Pacific Northwest, there is a lot of vegetation, and you can see from the map that the dark green is all coniferous forest, and then the yellow is herbaceous vegetation. So the majority of the area is covered in greenery, but the important part is because of the mountains, where there is a lot of snowpack to accumulate from the Cascades and the Rockies. This feeds the river basin, such as the Columbia River, which is the bigger river in the area. This then generates the water for all of the natural ecosystem, like the 19 national forests. Aside from the natural ecosystem usage, of course, there is also the human usage of the water for drinking water, fisheries, hydropower, agriculture, and forestry. For my research, I focus on generally how water precipitation trends are changing, and I got data from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change with their interactive atlas for examining precipitation and temperature changes, as well as the U.S. Geological Survey, where they have tables that show the amount of water use data in different areas, and also the National Operational Hydrological Remote Sensing Center, which reports on daily snowpack from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And then I also directly contacted experts to talk about their knowledge who are experts in the field. I talked with Karen Bombacco, who is an assistant state climatologist at the Office of the State Washington Climatologist, and she's researching at the University of Washington. She currently aids the state in whether or not and when to declare a drought. I also talked with Matthew Yorick, who is a research assistant at Washington State University, researching surface water supply and demand in the Columbia River Basin, and he's a graduate of the University of Idaho. Bombacco suggested looking at this publication of Shifting Snowlines and Shorelines, which talks about the hydropower reduction, irrigation, agriculture are going to have to change because statewide average spring snowpack is projected to decline up to 46% by mid-century and up to 70% by 2080s, which is relative to pre-2000 and based on all of the changes that have been happening with greenhouse gases and projections for future climate change. They also had a suggestion for an adaptation, which would be to work with an indigenous tribe and provide cultural fish rearing habitats, which would be helpful for aquaculture and the fisheries for water usage within the area. When I talked with Bombacco, we had a good conversation, and she specifically talked about the drought in 2021, just last year, but it was a very bizarre one because the expected precipitation was going to be normal, and when they examined the snowpack in April, it was average, it was where it was supposed to be, and then for the spring, projected precipitation was going to be normal as well, but then it ended up being that it was an extremely dry spring, and there was a huge heat wave afterwards with even record-breaking temperatures, and this was an issue because it even ended up leading to some human deaths because the area is not used to temperatures that ended up happening. And it was also an issue for irrigation for dry farmers because they rely on more of the natural precipitation instead of irrigating it from groundwater or available surface water. In the future, this could be an issue because this anomaly could become more of an average trend, and the area is going to have to adapt to some of those new temperatures and potentially more uncommon droughts and less precipitation. York suggested looking at this publication of shifts in western North American snowmelt runoff regimes because of the recent warmer decades, and this publication focused on how mountain runoff is captured in reservoirs, and reservoirs aren't able to keep up with the amount of snowpack that generally holds the water, as well as this snow melt that some of the snowpack is actually melting sooner and streams are flowing anywhere from 6 to 31 days earlier, which is problematic, especially for farmers who rely on consistent yearly stream flow and snow melt, because that is how they can work in their crops and work on irrigating at the correct times to make sure all of the production and food is on schedule to be distributed. Like Bumbaco, Urick also talked about a drought, but this was the 2015 drought, and this was an anomaly as well because it was a snow drought. There was still an overall average precipitation amount, but the difference of how the precipitation falls, whether it is snow or rain, changes the distribution of the water and the storage of the water. In the winter time, there was much less snow and there was more rain, meaning that there was a lot less snowpack, which led to less snow melt in the spring and lower stream flow. So there was water shortages because when the precipitation falls as rain during the winter, it doesn't accumulate and store the same way. It just melts and goes directly into the water basin as groundwater, surface water, and isn't distributed at a later time, so it is less consistent. There is also an issue because the reservoirs that would hold some of the runoff water cannot hold the same amount of storage that the snowpack would be able to hold, and then soil moisture is also different because of the different amounts of precipitation. I found it interesting that both experts suggested resources regarding snowpack and snow melt because this is so important for the precipitation and the storage and distribution for the region. So I looked at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have a database to look at snowpack over the years. All of these three figures are from February 15th, but the leftmost one is from 2009, the middle is from 2015, which is when the drought was, and the rightmost one is from 2020, just this year. Within the figure, you can see the top left of the 9 graphs shows the snow water equivalent. The 2009 one, that is what I'm kind of based off of as more of an average. You can see that there's a lot of pink and more coverage, meaning that there is more snow. In the 2015, you can see that there is a lot less of the snow water equivalent because that was when there was the snow drought. And then in 2020, it is kind of an in-between of 2009 and 2015, but it's still much less than it was in 2009. Then if you compare to the bottom right one, in the bottom corner, this is the non-snow precipitation, meaning that it would be more of the rain. And this shows the same kind of trend where in 2009 there is still some of the non-snow precipitation, especially along the coast where it is very rainy, compared to the 2015 when there was the snow drought. So there was a lot of rain precipitation. There's a lot of color, especially in that deep pink and deep purple in the middle figure. And then on the right, there is still more than 2009, but not nearly as much as 2015. I also examined data from the IPCC Interactive Atlas, and these graphs are from the seasonal changes and regarding the global climate change increase. The first one on the left is 2 degrees increase from December to February. The season would include more precipitation. The blue is indicative of higher precipitation and the yellow would be less precipitation. When you look specifically at the Pacific Northwest region, there is some increase in precipitation, which would be the winter season, and it could be from snow or from rain, versus on the right, this is from June to August during the summer with a more extreme 3 degrees increase. But again, looking at the Pacific Northwest, the center area where there is the Cascades, can receive some more precipitation, but on the more plain and highland areas, there's going to be less precipitation, which can be issues because that is where there is more difficulty to gain the water access. This table is from the U.S. Geologic Survey, and it's focused on Oregon, and this is specifically for water use for irrigation, which includes applied for irrigation systems to assist crops, pastures, and vegetation on recreational lands like parks and golf courses. This shows that it is from groundwater, surface water, or even self-withdrawn. And from 1985 to 2015, there's almost a consistent increase in each category. However, there is some fluctuation. From the same site, and also focusing on Oregon, this table is for commercial use instead of irrigation use, and it has the same kind of areas for water withdrawal, but this has more fluctuation than in the irrigation trends. And commercial use includes water drawn by public and private water suppliers to furnish water for at least 25 people or have 15 connections. So here there's more fluctuation showing that some alterations can be made to what water is used and how it is used, because adaptations are going to be necessary for the future. I also looked at the 2021 Water Year Impact Assessment, and this includes on the right the figure showing that 2021 was a water year warmer and drier than the normal for the Pacific Northwest. However, it is still not the most extreme out of all of the records, including going back to 1895. One of the examples they gave, though, with some of the issues occurring was from the Medford water in Oregon, which recognized that there was more concern over the water supply in the Rogue Valley, so they requested voluntary water reduction by the people living there, and ultimately this led to Medford water being able to still supply sufficient water to everybody, as some people reduced the amount of water that they used so that it would be applicable to all places. In conclusion, global climate change as it increases is changing the Pacific Northwest annual and seasonal precipitation trends, as the types and the lack of precipitation types being rain or as snow, and this changes the snowpack, leading to differentiations in snow melt and stream flow, which impacts human usage of irrigation, fisheries, reservoirs, hydropower, drinking water, and even in some cases recreation. As the future becomes more extreme and precipitation changes, more adaptations are going to have to be taken to be able to have better storage and access to different water types. Here is a list of my sources, and if you would like to, you can contact me at my email, and thank you for listening.